which I think you pretty much all are, so that's absolutely fantastic. And I will hope that we don't have a delivery to this house any second now, because then the dog will go mad and you'll get the benefit of him barking, as many people will have experienced with me. But a couple of quick announcements, if I may, because I may not get a chance at the end, and I want to make people aware of things that are happening. So the key thing I really want to bring your attention to is the Chamber of Commerce Awards, which are taking place. We are currently accepting entries for that up until the end of this month, the 28th of May, for what we plan to be our live event on the 2nd of September. And I think there's two key awards which might be attractive to this particular audience. One of them really does what it says on the tin. That's Manufacturer of the Year. And that is being brought to you in association with OGL Computers. So there's an opportunity perhaps for you to celebrate success within your business that way. The other one, which could take many forms and may well be discussed at times this afternoon, is what's referred to as Excellence in Innovation. And that is brought to you by the Malvern Hills Science Park. So two great sponsors, two great awards, and overall an opportunity to really celebrate what's happening. In terms of messages, a date for your diary is the 6th of July. The 6th of July is the next manufacturing forum. And at that particular forum, amongst other people, we'll be listening to Chris Howie of Tantec, whose name I'm looking for around the screen, and maybe not on the screen yet, but anyway, that's good. So we have Chris joining us for that one. And something else that has been brought to my attention quite literally this morning is a scheme which the Chamber of Commerce have been made aware of, which is referred to as Elevate Manufacturing. And that is a series of grant and support opportunities, which is focusing pretty much all around the sort of supply chain improvements here in the counties. So there are quite strict joining instructions for that. There are quite strict criteria. And so if you are interested in that, please drop Hayley a note, and then we'll make sure that we refer you to the right people with that one. So, or you might just like to Google it, Elevate Manufacturing, to see what that's all about. And the other thing with regards to promotion is that we are always welcoming stories and case studies, because we like to publicize and celebrate some of the successes that you have. We are regularly asked by the British Chamber of Commerce for case studies, and it's so valuable when Hereford and Worcestershire can actually send those down and be used in some of the work that they're doing. But equally, we can shout about it with your fellow members, and we can shout about the successes in your business as far as that's concerned. So a number of things just to contend with, but that's enough for me. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to Alan Dunbar from Metis Aerospace, Worcestershire company dealing with businesses all over the world. In terms of my research this morning on the website was, if you're not a client of Metis Aerospace, well, I don't know who is, because there is such a list of fantastic clients, and also a great video on their website. So if you do get the chance this afternoon after this, just pop onto their website and have a look at a brilliant video they've got, which sums up what they do. But with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Alan, and it's over to you, sir.
Thank you for that introduction, Robert, and good afternoon, everybody. Just by way of a brief bit of background, I've only just been at Metis for 5 months now, although I do have a long and established connection with Midlands Aerospace through work, and a personal local connection with Worcestershire as a graduate of Worcestershire University. So I want to talk to you today, and I'm joined on the call today with Jeremy Seaslick, our Chief Operating Officer, who I'm sure is known to many of you. But I want to talk to you today and just take a bit of a reflective look back at the pandemic and how that affected the wider aerospace industry, and look at the challenges and opportunities for us going forward, and how we're leveraging those in tandem with the local community and the local council to try and address the challenges that we face in aerospace. So if I begin sharing my screen with you now, hopefully you are all looking at a screen entitled Butterflies, Bullwhips and Footprints. I'll disappoint you right now, this isn't an Indiana Jones film, but nevertheless, this is really about the challenges that we've had in the last 12 months. But beyond that, you know, Metis, for those of you who don't know, and apologies for the typo here, Metis have actually been in the Redditch area since 1938 under high duty alloys, which was a site originally built and brought into operation to mitigate the threat of attack from Nazi Germany to the original HDA site elsewhere in the country. So we've got quite a connection here that spans quite a breadth of aerospace products. So we've gone from making pistons and brackets for Spitfires and Lancaster bombers, all the way to today manufacturing parts for satellites. So with Concorde along the way. So I think we've got quite a spread of experience across our background here in Redditch.
Sorry to interrupt you, Alan. We can't see a presentation at the moment. You may have not quite shared your screen. Sorry to interrupt you.
Okay.
Would you like to try and share? I've got a few messages. Ah, there we go. It's coming up.
Okay.
There we go. That's what we like to see. Sorry, I'll leave you to it.
Thing. Okay. So as I say, we are a forging organisation, although we've added to that capability over the last few years. So we're now what we call a fully vertically integrated supplier of finished components into some of the biggest customers that we have. So in terms of what we do, we moved away, as I said, we were originally established during the war or pre-war. We still have a fairly significant footprint within defence, but most of our product now is centered around commercial aerospace, and you can just see a selection of some of the stuff that we do here. Pretty much all areas of the aircraft we tend to touch. In terms of the industry that we serve, I want to share with you just how the industry is broken down, because I think we underestimate ourselves, particularly in the Midlands, with the gravity and the footprint that we have within the Midlands or within the aerospace industry as a whole. So we start with the primes at the top, as you can see on the diagram here. So that's your Airbuses, your Boeings, your Rolls-Royces, the people who actually make the aircraft themselves or the engine platforms themselves. We then have at a tier 1 level the major systems integrators. So these are the people who supply large sections of airplane or large sections of engine. And these tend to be who our customers are within Metis Aerospace. And below that, in tier 3 and 4 and 2 of the supply chain, we've got some 350 companies in the Midlands area involved in the manufacture of aerospace components. And that's just in the Midlands area, where we generate £9 billion of revenue every year. So, and that's, although that's not a huge component part in the overall aerospace industry, nevertheless, for UK manufacturing, I think it's a huge statement of our capability here, and some of the big names that we see in the tier 1 level there, for example, Moog, Collins, GKN Aerospace, are all based right here in the Midlands. So it's a huge heritage that we have, and we really are global players within that particular market. So aerospace is typically a cyclic type of market. So we see demand profiles that tend to last 7 years, although up till 2019, we were into year 10 of a 7-year super cycle. So that was going really well. We'd survived some dips before, as you can see there, the Gulf War, 9/11 and the financial crash, etc. Ebola, less of an effect. And then COVID-19 hit, and this graphic is just to display the impact that COVID-19 has had on the aerospace industry. Now, you don't need to be a genius to work that one out. Just take a look up and let me know if you can see any airplanes overhead. I'm sure you can't. But nevertheless, this butterfly effect that we've had, and excuse my play on words up at the top there, but this butterfly effect that we had has absolutely, for the first time in history, has brought the whole airline and aerospace industry to a crunching halt. So that was a bit of a problem for a lot of organizations. And the reason for that really stems back to what I was saying about the way the supply chain tiers are actually organized. And if we look at the way we build airplanes, at the top of the triangle on the left there, you'll see that aircraft manufacturers, between aircraft manufacturers and the systems integrators, at tier 1, there tends to be about 3 to 6 months worth of inventory in the supply chain. And then you come down between the systems integrators and the components manufacturers, the Metis Aerospace of the world, the Bromford Industries, guys like that. There's another 3 months inventory sitting in the supply chain. And then you get down to the poor old ThyssenKrupps and Gold Alloys and various others around the Midlands, where there's another 3 months inventory sitting in the supply chain there as well. So you can see how that aggregates up. So a small knock-on effect in demand has a really amplified and really dramatic effect at the bottom end of the supply chain. That presented everybody with a massive cash problem. And the massive cash problem is a lot of cash tied up in working capital, and B, we still have to pay people, and we still have to pay our suppliers and our employees. So almost all organizations really faced a huge challenge here. And we hear about some organizations pivoting. Very difficult to do when you're an aerospace organization, because the cost of quality, reassuringly, in aerospace is extremely high. The standards to which we need to produce components is higher than most, if not all, other industries. So that really precludes us from being able to pivot too much. So we faced some real challenges, and as you can see, the explanation at the bottom right there was the bullwhip effect that we faced. When we flip that on its head, and now we're all talking about getting back on aircraft around about hopefully August time, when we'll all be jetting off on our holidays, and we all want to start building airplanes again. We want to start building lots of airplanes. The problem there, of course, is that now that we've drained all of the inventory out of the system, we need to put it back, which takes even more cash, which presents even more challenges. And this really talks to the aerospace industry in terms of Boris Johnson's statement about building back better and building back greener. And in times of crisis, it's long been researched and proven that the best and most successful way to actually navigate through a crisis is through information and management of information, and through innovation. And that's something that we're really trying to do here at Metis Group with a high degree of success, I hasten to add. So what do we think about when we're rethinking and we're reshaping? So one of the key things for us really is, and it's one of the benefits, I suppose, of the lockdown, we commented that we could hear birds singing out of our windows when we opened the window. There were no cars and trucks on the road, and the air felt fresher, as we saw reported quite a bit. And if we take that a step further and we think about how we can innovate and how we can build ourselves back to capitalize on the supply chain opportunities, because many businesses are going to fall over because of the cash problems we've seen and I've just described. A lot of businesses are going to fall over and drop out of the supply chain, and that really creates opportunities. And we're up against a cost competitive industry that's based out in Southeast Asia. China, for example, is an extremely aggressive and cost competitive player in the industry. So how can we differentiate ourselves? What can we do that's better, and what can we do that's different? And one of the things that we've been able to do here at Metis is focus on the carbon footprint that we have here, and being part of this leaner, greener aerospace industry that we all aspire to. As we go forward, the carbon challenge that we have for aviation is Fly Zero, you may have heard of. So that is zero carbon emissions from aircraft by 2030. That's not net zero, that's absolutely zero carbon emissions from new build aircraft from 2030. Huge challenge when you consider that today, or prior to the pandemic, we were pumping around about 885 million tons of CO2 into the atmosphere every year. We have 4.5 billion passengers passing through our airports every year. We use 22 million litres of kerosene at Heathrow Airport alone. So that gives you some idea of the challenge that we have for reducing carbon. There are a lot of initiatives in aerospace: hydrogen power, electrical power, common themes, urban air mobility, flying taxis, lots and lots of initiatives around to reduce our carbon footprint and be able to hit that net zero. But we're still not going to get away from the way we actually build an aircraft and some of the methods that we need to build into the aircraft supply chain. So we see it as our responsibility at Metis, and I see it as the wider responsibility of the industry itself, to reduce that carbon footprint as much as we possibly can. So this is some of the things that we focused on. So you can see that, you know, by moving towards this reduced carbon footprint, we're indirectly contributing to the government's larger initiatives, but the larger initiative of the Fly Zero campaign itself within aerospace. Of course, forging takes a lot of heat and a lot of energy. We do take large lumps of metal, we do heat it to incredibly high temperatures, and then we tend to hit it or press it with incredible sized presses. For those of you, if you've ever been around our facility, we really do have some massive pieces of equipment here. So that in itself presents a challenge for reducing carbon. But that in itself isn't the only point of attack. This map shows you a part that we originally made. We made the forging for this part, and it gives you an idea of the distance traveled by one part, okay, geographically. Now you think whether that part travels by ship or by air or by truck, That's a huge carbon footprint. And what we were doing was we were making the forging for that part. It was then being machined in the United States. It was coming back to a customer in Scotland and then finishing its journey back down on an aircraft down in France. So we looked at that as a whole entity, and we've been fortunate enough to be successful in now we are now fully machining the finished part itself. So by comparison, that was the previous distance traveled by the part. There's the new distance. So just in that one part alone, that's the value that we're able to add to the customers just through that investment in capability, that investment in the new manufacturing technology here at Redditch, but we can have a direct bearing on the carbon footprint and help contribute towards the Fly Zero campaign from our own manufacturing facility. The next thing we've done, and we had a grant, it was assisted by a grant from the local authorities, is a heat conversion plant here on site at Redditch. And if you ever drive past the site, you'll see the two chimneys sticking up. And what we have here are two power generators, okay? So as well as generating power for us, we actually capture, the system captures the exhaust gas and uses the heat from the exhaust gas to provide heating and heating of hot water around the site. So it's not fully sustainable. However, it's reduced our energy usage quite considerably. And I'm sure Jeremy will comment at the end and tell us how much. I believe it's somewhere in the region of 20%. But just being more frugal and more energy efficient in the way we're actually powering our operation, again, is providing a contribution towards our lowered carbon footprint and building our capability within our supply chain. And finally, those of us employed in the front end of the business development, who are the worst culprits for getting on aircraft and jetting around the world, or getting in our cars and bombing up and down the M6. We have a voluntary carbon offset scheme going. And this is through a third party called Ecology. And Greg Mackey here is our sustainability champion within business development. So he's involved in all of these projects and trying to lower our carbon footprint through influencing the business and influencing the behaviours that we have of the employees here in the business. And this is, you can see that Greg here himself is 16 months climate positive, which is challenging the rest of us to get to. So there's a number of initiatives that we have in play here, and this is just, you know, the start point for us. But this is our commitment to the local area. This is our commitment to sustaining the local environment, as well as growing the business and maintaining our position at the forefront of the industry we're in. And I'll close by leaving you, for anybody who is interested in more information in some of the initiatives that we have here on site. This is Greg's contact details. Please do feel free to reach out to Greg or myself and ask any questions. So that's my presentation for today.
Great stuff, Alan. Thank you very much indeed. That's fantastic. And I think it just goes to prove that it is so true. I like that expression you had about innovation and information for us to be able to share that. And as somebody who lives in the flight path of Birmingham Airport, we now look up when we hear a plane, as opposed to before that obviously we just took it for granted. So it is very true what's happening in that marketplace. And I think also, I mean, we are all very evident of the net zero challenges that we are going to be faced. And I think the fact that you are involved in projects which are zero, as in real zero, I think is fascinating for all of us. That's very good indeed. Thank you for that. Any questions, ladies and gentlemen, for Alan and for his team?
I think one thing I would like to point out, if I may, Rob, is just that you know, the investment that we've made and the partnerships that we've had within our supply chain to enable us to do this are actually local as well. I notice we've got Matthias Mayer on the call today, of course, from Heller Machine Tools, who have been instrumental in the activity that's going on here at Redditch and supporting that reduction in the carbon footprint of the parts I was talking about.
That's a very well made point, Alan, and I think you mentioned a few of those companies being very locally based to us, and it's absolutely the case that we can celebrate that in Herefordshire and Worcestershire for sure. So it looks as if you've managed to get away there, Alan, with no questions, which means one of two things normally. And I think it's probably because you've impressed us so much with your content that you've answered all the questions, or that they're too shy. But I can't believe that for 1 minute. So, but you never know. We might get questions at the end. Somebody might think of something, and then we'll field those accordingly. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to hand over to Mark Dodwell. Now, Mark is coming to us from NatWest. Again, a fascinating read for me when I was doing a bit of homework with regards to future mobility and NatWest involvement in that. And I think we're going to certainly hear some very interesting information with regards to innovation, funnily enough. So it's how that works. But Mark is a familiar face, I think, to many. He's definitely a friend to our counties. And so it is great pleasure now just to hand you over to Mark, who's going to run us through his presentation. And don't forget, folks, questions in the chat box if you have them, or we'll do the good old hands up at the end. Over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Robert. And yes, it's really good to be back in the Hereford-Worcester Chamber environment. I'm a Worcester, not born and bred, but I've lived here for about 12 years. I know there's some very recognisable faces on the screen. Ben, Jim, Mateus met before. So it's good to be back here. I used to run the commercial team for NatWest in Hereford-Worcester. I'm joined by Barry Lewis and Jeremy O'Grady from that team. But about 16 months ago, I moved across to the Future Mobility Group within NatWest. And the purpose of today's session is just to kind of, I guess, quite neatly leading on from Alan's presentation around net zero. And Alan and I hadn't spoken before today, so it actually fits in quite neatly. I'm sure that's all down to Hayley kind of working out who are the right speakers to join up. But today is very much just to bring to life for you future mobility and the disruption that we see coming from future mobility. I'll kind of explain as we go through what we mean by future mobility. And I'll be really interested to pick up with Alan after this, because I've just been asked in the last week or so to start to think about the aviation industry and where we might play there. So a bit of a precursor. I won't be kind of touching on aviation, but it's more kind of around sort of ground transport and something that you'll all be impacted by, and future mobility will impact every sector. So there's, I guess, more disruption for those in the automotive supply chain, and there are, I know, a couple of you on the call. James, we've met before in the automotive supply chain. So hopefully I can bring to life a little bit of kind of what's happening in that industry, which hopefully you should already be aware of anyway. But let's just get my screen up and sharing. So bear with me for 2 seconds. Okay, hopefully you can all see that. I'm looking at the other screen. Yeah, all good. Okay. So let's just, okay, so one of the first questions I get asked when I kind of deliver this is, what's NatWest doing playing in the future mobility space? About 12 to 14 months ago, Alison Rose was appointed as our new CEO. Alison launched our new strategy, our purpose-led strategy, in February of last year. And right at the forefront of that is climate. And much as Alan's just talked around, you know, we recognise that we have a role to play in driving down carbon emissions and improving the global climate situation. The Future Mobility Group, sorry, my dog's just started barking. So the Future Mobility Group was created because we recognised as a bank that transport is the biggest greenhouse gas emitter now in the UK. And our role within this is to try and help our customers and our staff look at ways of supporting decarbonisation of UK road transport. Like I say, I've just been asked to start to look at marine and aviation and take that further, but today is very much around kind of focused on that UK road transport. And we're here to try and support all areas of the bank and their customers in managing the disruption that's driven by future mobility. So in doing kind of that, we kind of think about disruption, and there's two areas of disruption, or two things that are driving that disruption. Naturally, the climate emergency, but also the green industrial revolution. The 10-point plan, I'm sure you'll all be aware that the government launched its 10-point plan back in November of last year. Within that plan, point 2 is driving the growth of low carbon hydrogen. Point 4 is accelerating the shift to zero emissions from vehicles. Point 5 is sort of green public transport, cycling and walking. and point 6 points absolutely to Alan's industry of jet zero and green ships. So there's lots of disruption kind of coming down the line. What we're trying to do with our enterprise and learning hat on, which are the other two key pillars of our purpose-led strategy, is trying to understand how the world is changing, what it means for our customers' business models. And that's what I wanted to get into today. So from I guess from a transport perspective, the biggest element of that green industrial revolution is from 23rd, or in November, in that 10-point plan, the government announced that they were pulling forward the ban on internal combustion engine sales, new car sales and new van sales to 2030. In 24, at this time last year, it was at 2040, then it was moved to 2035. I think it's fair to say that it caught some of the OEMs by surprise in November when it was pulled forward to 2030. And actually talking to some industry experts this week, I was told they were pushing for 2025, but the OEMs clearly pushed back on that front. So there is lots of disruption coming down the line. And when it comes to transport, I guess the question for you and your business, what does that mean for your business? And one of the things we've started to look at is, where does transport feature in a business's value chain? From inbound logistics, operations, outbound logistics, marketing and sales, service. Obviously, Alan's just talked around, the carbon that's being generated in transporting raw material across, and Alan kind of touched on that in his presentation just now. But the question we're sort of asking our customers is, where does transport feature? What vehicles are you currently running? Where do your goods or your people travel in those vehicles? Because that's really prevalent, and I'll kind of elaborate on these points. And the other area to kind of think about is, how do your staff commute to and from work? And again, I'll kind of elaborate on that. And the reason we're doing that, and some of you may be aware of this, maybe all of you will be aware of this, but that there is a need to start to think about your reporting, measuring and reporting, much as Alan has alluded to, your carbon emissions. And I don't know if any of you have seen this graph previously, but we're using it to kind of, again, ask that question of our customers. How is your business contributing to greenhouse gas emissions through transport? And there's three scopes within that. The first is your direct company vehicles. So any vehicles you own and use to transport your goods, they are scope 1. The harder thing to measure is the scope 3 emissions. And transport features quite heavily when we talk about scope 3. So upstream and downstream activities of raw materials coming in, finished goods being moved around. And also within that scope 3 is employee commuting and business travel. And Alan touched on it in his presentation around business travel and the carbon you emit when you do that. So we're using this to really kind of understand, get our customers to start thinking about it. And many of you on the call might be thinking, well, actually, we're not of a size where we need to measure and report this yet. I guess what we are seeing, Alan showed in his presentation, Airbus and Rolls-Royce in the OEMs. What we are seeing, and we're doing ourselves in our sector, is people at the very top of the supply chain are of a size that they have to mandatory report scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. Don't have to report scope 3, but many are starting to think about how they report scope 3. And that challenge is then coming down the supply chain to say, to ask the same question. So whilst your business might not be of a size that needs to worry about this, there may become a need through supply chain and supply chain viability to be able to do that. So it's like I say, it's just at the moment, it's having that opportunity to think about this and think about what the impact of your business might be. So that's how the government's kind of really driving future mobility and the drivers of change. There are a couple of areas that we're seeing that are also driving change in this space. Technology, if we talk about ground transport, you'll all be aware electrification is a big player, and battery technology, AI for autonomous vehicles is kind of developing all the time. Consumer behavior is another kind of driver of change. Like or loathe Greta, some people like her, some people loathe her. You can't help but notice what she's done for her generation and waking up to the climate challenge. David Attenborough at the other end of the age scale, is a real champion of this, and it is causing consumer behaviour. It's causing people to change and think about what they do. So these are all having an effect on future mobility. And to the points that Alan made in his, COVID has also had an impact. You know, cities this time last year when we were in lockdown 1, cities were very, very clean. There was very little air pollution, very little traffic, and it has caused people to think about how they move around. It certainly caused disruption in the commuting industry. Go and talk to any bus or train company right now, and probably have a similar graph to the one that Alan showed for aviation on their uptake of kind of customers over the last 12 to 15 months. So it really is kind of having an impact. And I guess at this point, I should say, what do we mean by future mobility? Future mobility for us is in the sort of ground transport areas, 3 areas: autonomous vehicles, mobility as a service, and electrification. And I'll just unpack these a little bit more for you now. Autonomous vehicles, you kind of think very much back to the future. But realistically, it's happening here, it's happening now, and there's a lot happening in the Midlands. Midlands Future Mobility is being run out of Warwick Manufacturing Group, part of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult Centre in Warwick. I'm sure most of you on the call will be aware. But Midlands Future Mobility is really kind of driving this on behalf of the government. There are currently in setup to put 300 miles of test bed in between the Coventry and Birmingham area. So you will start to see autonomous vehicles being piloted on that roadway network in and around Birmingham and Coventry. It should have kicked off last year. COVID has clearly delayed things. But there is real kind of innovation and development in that autonomous vehicle space. There's a couple of pictures on here. The first picture on the top left, if you go to Milton Keynes, jump off the train in Milton Keynes and want to get into the city centre, you can now jump in these autonomous pods that can move you around into the city. Those pods are made in the West Midlands. The picture on the right, naturally, you can't fail to guess where that's operating, but Heathrow Airport, there are these autonomous pods that take you from car parks into the airport. They are being manufactured in the West Midlands as well. So there's a lot happening in this autonomous vehicle space. You know, over the years to come, we'll start to see more and more of that move away from the closed sort of environments that these vehicles currently operate in to more and more on the open road. And there's already autonomous elements to the vehicles we drive today. I guess, you know, we are starting to see manufacturers, you know, venture into autonomous vehicles, seeing what the opportunities are, and perhaps venturing into those areas. Particularly if they've sort of had troubles over the COVID period and thinking about transitioning their business, can their current product maybe kind of fit in autonomous vehicles? But that's kind of where we see there happening from future mobility. Mobility as a service is an interesting one. Mobility as a service, for anybody that doesn't know, it's effectively it's reducing the ownership of vehicles and usership. And it's trying to create a platform that makes the ease of getting from A to B via a number of different methods easy by just buying one ticket. So the example I would use here is if I live in Worcester, I'm going to go into Birmingham, I've got to get to a meeting on the other side of Birmingham. I get a bus from my house down to the train station, I get the train from Worcester into Birmingham, and I might jump on one of the new West Midlands cycle hire bike sharing things and get to my meeting that way. That's 3 different modes of transport, and mobility as a service should be a platform where I buy one ticket and it allows me to do all things. Our research in this space has kind of highlighted that actually it's a long way off. The commercials in the UK just don't work. In my scenario there, if I decide to cancel that trip at the last minute, who pays for the refund? Is it the bus company? Is it the train company? Or is it the bike sharing scheme? And that's where it kind of falls down at the moment. But a lot of work we've done with local authorities, and particularly with Transport for West Midlands, when we actually get to the crux of what are they really trying to achieve, what's the challenge here? It's with the introduction of clean air zones that they want to try and alleviate the problem of single occupancy car journeys. And commuters, we're all commuters. Every one of us is commuters. When we're not in a global pandemic and working from home permanently, we are all commuting. So there is very much local authorities, business parks that we've been talking to. How do we reduce that reliance on the single occupancy car journey? And you know, every one of us is a commuter. So some of the questions we've been asking our customers is, did you know, 20% of car journeys in the UK are under 1 mile. 66% of car journeys are under 5 miles. commuting equates to 25% of the UK's total transport emissions. I'm not going to read all of those stats on there, but it's really interesting. We have a culture of jumping into our cars to do very short journeys, partly because of it might be because of the British climate and the British weather that we have, but there are alternatives. And I guess a question for you, and the question we ask of our customers, is how are your staff commuting to work today? If you think about that diagram I showed earlier, Scope 3 emissions includes employee commuting. So how are your staff commuting today? How far are they commuting? What alternative options are there? And what emissions are your staff producing on their commute? How would you know? We've actually partnered with a company called Mobility Ways, and they are doing some work for us as an organisation to help us understand that question. You know, we are starting to ask that of our supply chain as well. So again, I kind of raise it because it could come up as and when those at the top of your supply chain are starting to place demands on you. And the alternative methods, I guess micromobility, what we're seeing from commuting is kind of people, and COVID has definitely driven this, more of an active travel. The government's 10-point plan points to more cycling and walking for commuting. And micromobility is a huge growth industry. It'll be a $500 billion economy by 2030. We're starting to see kind of more manufacturing of e-bikes, e-cargo bikes, those kind of shared scooters, shared bike schemes. I've been talking to a number of kind of bike firms who are actively looking at reshoring the bike manufacturer back to the UK. So I raise it on here because it perhaps is another area of manufacturing that might open up opportunities for some of you on the call. But also, like I say, for your staff, how are they getting to work, and are there alternatives for them commuting other than in an internal combustion engine vehicle? So that's kind of mobility service commuting. Electrification is where I'll kind of just very quickly kind of run through. Some of you may have seen this picture before. You know, the electric revolution just got bigger in the window because the government have announced that new car and van sales will be banned. Internal combustion engine sales will be banned from 2030. This picture on here, the picture on the left shows, this is the Easter Day parade in New York in 1900. You had one motor vehicle and hundreds of horse-drawn carriages. Scroll forward 13 years and you've got the reverse. You've got one horse-drawn carriage and thousands of cars. You know, that's 13 years. We're now sitting here in 2021. We've got 9 years until 2030. So it's, you know, I guess when it was 2040 and we were still 19 years away, people were thinking, well, I've got plenty of time. But if you're running fleets of vehicles in your organisation today, you know, cars and vans, potentially the next time you renew those, you need to think about, do you electrify? Do you carry on with internal combustion engine? The ban, if you're not aware, isn't on hybrids. Hybrids will still be available to be sold until 2035. They've got a 5-year stay of execution from the government. But it's all moving. The automotive industry is moving to a 2030 deadline. So it is getting bigger in the window, and there is a challenge to that transition, particularly for you as business owners and the fleets of vehicles that you're running, either for your staff to move around in or to move your goods. You know, when do you make that transition across? When do you swap? What's the cost implications? What incentives are available? How do you fuel them? Do you provide that charging at home or office or both for your staff? Do you provide charging for customers? Business processes will need to be thought about. You know, if you've got staff running around in company cars today, they're probably claiming pence per mile for the petrol and diesel they put in those cars. How do you run that process, that reimbursement process for charging electric at home? And potentially, you know, for your business, if you are installing kind of charge points, energy supply, that could be a challenge for you. So these are all things you've got to think of. Choices of vehicles, you know, there's more and more cars coming. Like commercial vehicles and vans, there's definitely a supply and demand challenge there. The OEMs haven't really kind of got their kind of focus on vans when it comes to electric vans. There's more coming, but what we're seeing is the big users of these are snapping up all the supply that's coming out. And I guess the other point to mention is suitable for requirements. You know, lots of people talk about mileage range, and electric vehicles aren't very good because they don't get you very far. But you also need to think about clean air zones and ultra low emission zones. What you will see in the UK, if anybody is transporting goods into Oxford, Oxford later this year will become the first city that is a zero emission zone. So a clean air zone. You can't fail to notice if you listen to the radio around here that Birmingham has a clean air zone coming from the 1st of June. If you're driving a Euro 6 vehicle, you will still be able to drive into Birmingham in your Euro 6 diesel car. In Oxford later this year, you won't be able to unless it's an electric vehicle or a zero emissions vehicle. So this could have an impact on you delivering your goods into those cities. And Oxford will be the first of many zero emission zones. We believe that's the way the market will go. The other thing to kind of just bear in mind around kind of costs and incentives, benefit in kind on electric vehicles is very low right now. A lot of people, a lot of organisations, including our own, saw salary sacrifice company car schemes almost die because of the benefit in kind tax. Benefit in kind on electric vehicles is 1% this year. It rises to 2% next year and then is held at 2% for the next few years. When you compare that to 40% previously, it is a big saving, and we're starting to see the regeneration of salary sacrifice company car schemes. Lots of people are starting to see that as a better way and an easier way of getting an electric vehicle. And you have to think of total cost of ownership when you're thinking electric vehicles. They are more expensive up front than standard petrol diesel today. And the vans are exactly the same. Cars and vans are more expensive. There are incentives from the government, £2,500 on cars up to £35,000. And there's a sort of a rolling scale on vans, but those incentives won't be there forever. The government have announced the incentive on home charge points will disappear at the end of next year. It's currently a £500 grant in that space, but that will have be gone. Sorry, it's not 500, it's £350, but that will be gone by next year. So these are all kind of challenges for you as businesses to think about. But the investment is huge. Over the next 10 years, this is kind of what it's going to cost the UK economy to make this transition to electric. 16 billion in EV public charging and associated infrastructure. Just some of the other numbers, 48 billion to support the whole fleet transition in the UK. These are huge numbers and all kind of areas that we need to think about. So they're kind of the general themes of future mobility. Just very quickly before I wrap up, what is the impact on manufacturing? You might not be able to see all of the kind of graphics on here, but it's quite a powerful slide. That's kind of recognised supply chains in this space at the moment. So you've got automotive manufacturing, you've got logistics and corporate fleets, transport infrastructure. What we are seeing from the mega trends that I've talked through today is we're seeing kind of new markets, new industries appear. So you've now got new EV supply chains, new AV supply chains, MAS supply chains, and EV charging value chains. That changes a picture. So it poses a threat, the disruption from future mobility, but it certainly provides lots of opportunity as well. And as manufacturers in the UK, potentially if you're in the automotive industry, you may need to transition, you may need to think about kind of different markets for yourself, then there is plenty of opportunity as well. So that's kind of wrapping that up, I guess. So some key considerations for your business. Firstly, from a climate, 2015 Paris Agreement, this is not an option for business now. It's every business's responsibility to focus on climate. Alan's talked today already what Metis are doing in this space. We all have a responsibility to play a part here. What are your current transport emissions and how can you reduce them? Start to think about those questions if you haven't already. From a cost perspective, what will it cost to make the changes to your business? How are you going to fund those? And what's the cost for not making them? If you don't make those changes, what happens to you? Your colleagues, so your staff, do they want to work for a climate conscious business? How can you support staff with improved future mobility choices? Things to think about. And the real key one is that whole commercial, the future viability. As I said, we are seeing supply chains right at the top of the supply chains there. They are starting to measure and report on this. They are starting to push that down into the supply chain. So there will be a need to be able to answer that question. And consumer preference will change, change the commercial viability of certain businesses, and pressure to act will come from various sources. A couple of things that we are doing, last slide before I wrap up, our overall strategy. So future mobility at NatWest, we are here to support the drive to decarbonise UK transport. Much like today, we're doing lots of these events where we're just giving an oversight into the area, and we'll start to deliver wider on these. But customer and colleague engagement, we're helping our staff and our customers just start to think about this subject. We are looking at how do we help fleet transition from that electric vehicle journey. So we have, through our Lombard colleagues and our Lombard Asset Finance division, we're helping customers with that transition. From an infrastructure perspective, we're the first bank to partner with a charge point operator. A couple of months ago, we announced a partnership with Octopus Energy. I can certainly send more details on that out with Hayley at the end, but we have partnered with Octopus Energy. So if a business wants to think about charge points, we can introduce you to Octopus. They can do that for you. That then leads to wider kind of heating, energy use, energy supply, and grid capacity. And we have arrangement with Octopus to help our customers with that. And the other area that I've touched on today is net zero commuting. We are starting to look with Mobility Ways as how do we help our customer base understand that commuting emissions and how you report it, how do you measure it, and what changes can you make. So just a few key takeaways. Climate sustainability, decarbonisation is happening. Think about what actions do you need to take to manage disruptors from future mobility. You need to anticipate and plan those. How might your business gain from the opportunities that are being created in future mobility? What's your business's plans for the vehicles you run today and how you support staff transport? If you haven't seen it already, you may not have done if you're not a customer of NatWest, but NatWest Business Hub is a website. It's open to anybody to view. You don't have to be a customer. There's all sorts of thought leadership collateral that we've posted on this subject in that space. Feel free to go and have a look. And I'll just leave you with the final kind of slide, just reminding you and kind of asking that question: what are your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, and what will you do to reduce them? And that's it from me.
Mark. That's absolutely fascinating and very, very extensive. I think a lot of people would have found that quite thought-provoking. I think one of the things that struck me was that we are trying to change people's behaviours, aren't we? We are trying to change people's habits, and as we have found with recycling, with the use of carrier bags, it takes time, and whether or not we've actually allowed ourselves enough time to make these changes, only time will tell. But we are trying to change people's habits, and that can be a very challenging thing to do. A couple of questions, well, a question and an observation. One of the questions that's popped up is quite an interesting one in terms of revenues, because, and the question comes from Granger Forson, who's saying, when do you see the government taxing electric vehicles to recover the loss of tax from fuel? How do you think they might be able to do that?
Yeah, it's Granger, it's a really good question. It's probably a question I get asked a lot of the time. I guess there isn't an answer at the moment on that. But what I would say is the government took the industry by surprise a few weeks ago by reducing the incentives. We've done quite a bit of work and looked across Europe and looked at the incentives that other governments are providing for EVs. They're all increasing. The UK government has already started to decrease. Now, the UK government kind of says that's because the subsidies were being used by people that actually didn't really need them. They want to try and get those subsidies being used by the people who would need them. But subsidies they're going to run out at some point. When you see the adoption start to rise, the subsidies will just keep on decreasing. They've not given any indication as to what they'll do about taxing. It will come. It will have to come, because you're going to lose a huge revenue stream from tax on petrol and diesel. So, yeah, unfortunately, I can't answer that at the moment, Granger. But it's something we keep very close to, because we are, that whole subsidy piece took us by surprise. It took the industry by surprise, and I think you'll continue to see it decrease now. They've already set their stall out. So,
thank you very much for that. And Jim McBride's just disappearing, but he's actually offered, I think, to buy us all a drink next week, which is very generous of him. That's absolutely fantastic. Make sure you save this chat, folks. No, on a serious note, though, actually, Granger makes another point that their business have actually installed solar panels using the low-COP grants, which are available through Worcester City Council. Well, you've teed it up for me, so I'm going to bang it into the back of the net, because the Chamber of Commerce actually facilitates the Business Energy Efficiency Programme and LOCOP. So if you do have a desire to try and work with that scheme, we can make that happen with a gentleman called Simon Helmer, who does that for us. So thank you for that one. So I'm going to go over to Jeremy, who's got his hand up. Jeremy O'Grady, over to you, Jeremy.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks for the presentation, Mark. That was really, really informative. Well, obviously, I spend quite a lot of time talking to my customers about their green agenda and what they're doing to move towards a sort of net zero environment. And invariably, that leads to discussion around electric vehicles versus the internal combustion engine. And a lot of the time, the sort of main themes in terms of pushback tends to be around lack of choice, cost, delivery times, and also the range in terms of battery capacity. I think it'd be quite useful if you could just share some of your thoughts on that, please, if you would.
Yeah, so I think cost, you can't get away from the fact that the on-the-road price is more expensive. They are, but we'll hopefully see battery costs come down. Anybody any one of you in the West Midlands can't fail to see Andy Street tweets every week that he's desperate to get a gigafactory in the West Midlands. If we can get gigafactories up and running in the UK, you will see that cost come down. Battery technology will improve, and it will naturally decrease. What I would say is you've got to compare apples with apples. If you compare the total cost of ownership of an electric vehicle today, currently as it stands, I run a battery electric vehicle now. I charge it at home. Culturally, I've got used to charging it like I charge this thing every night. And the cost, the mileage comparison to what it used to cost me to put petrol and diesel in my old car is much reduced. It's probably 20% of what I used to pay in petrol and diesel. So you have to compare apples with apples on that front. From a mileage range, again, with the battery technology develops, most vehicles these days you'll get a stated 200. I don't quite get 200 from the Audi that I've got that's stated at 200 miles. It's more like 160 on a warm day. Don't try and charge them when it's freezing cold, because that's another story altogether. But some models now, some of the Teslas are 350 miles. But I think realistically, everybody says, oh, you can't get that far on them. But how many times do we, and I accept from a business perspective, you might have staff that are traveling hundreds of miles each day. But naturally, generally as individuals in our personal life, I only travel over 100 miles twice a year. So it's really thinking about usership and how you use it. If it's, if you're doing 50 to 100 miles a day, you'll just get used to charging it overnight using this. And there are, energy providers have got low rate tariffs that it's cheap to charge in the middle of the night when electricity consumption's low. So hopefully that answers some of those questions, Jeremy. But yeah, there's lots for businesses to consider, and I do recognise that business mileage that your companies on here are running potentially there's not enough mileage range on some of the vans and cars at the moment.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. Jeremy, thanks for that question. A question in the chat from Alan, who's Alan Dunbar, who's took us down memory lane as well.
I did see it. Yeah.
For those of us old enough to remember the Betamax or VHS video systems, on that basis, do you see hydrogen power posing a credible and viable alternative to electrification of vehicles and personal mobility?
Yeah, so I think there's people on it. James, I'm looking at James Derrett on the screen. He may have.
I was going to say there. I think it's a bit of a geographical thing, possibly where that will go. I think electrically EV. I think for Europe and certainly for major cities in China and Asia, it will be EV. But for sure, hydrogen's still got a different route. Japan is very strong in that area, and Toyota is very heavily backed behind hydrogen, putting an entire city run by hydrogen in Japan at the moment. When you come to long haul, and when you are doing hundreds or thousands of miles and moving stuff across the States and other places, then there may well be a case
Yeah,
being popular for that type of work and moving stuff across Europe. So, but it will be a fairly, you need the network, and clearly in the UK it's a very limited network at the moment.
Yeah, and thank you, James. I won't dodge the question completely, Alan. I think, you know, what we've seen is you've got the electricity infrastructure there. I know it needs improving. You know, that kind of charging on the go. There's lots of work to be done there. The government they did announce in the November Green Industrial Revolution that there'll be a consultation paper that they would publish. It'll probably be towards the back end of this year on hydrogen and how do you kind of change that HGV, that larger vehicle fleet, and hydrogen could play a part, but for now, I think, and the OEMs are all, I guess they're all exploring hydrogen as well. But as James says, in Europe we've got that electrical infrastructure, that electricity infrastructure there, and there is more and more, you know, huge amounts of money being invested by the OEMs into electric, with, I guess, more R&D still being done in the hydrogen space.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. I think my question was really just sort of, it was triggered by the announcement by JLR that they're going to stop building internal, or they're going to be all electric by 2025. And the first thought that popped into my mind is, how far are you actually going to be able to move a 3-ton Range Rover on batteries? And how big's the battery going to have to be?
Yeah, and they're not the only ones. You know, a lot of the other OEMs have come out and said the same. So, you know, and I think that's where, you know, the technology is probably going to have to catch up, and they probably know stuff that you and I don't know yet. But it will. I think it will determine. The JLRs of this world do need a UK gigafactory, at least one, maybe 2 or 3.
They were also quite specific that it was Jaguar rather than Jaguar Land Rover when they made that announcement as well. They've got a little bit of time behind them to push the Land Rovers through on the EV side. So
sure.
Good stuff. Thank you for that. If ever there's a good reason to have that factory here in the Midlands, then that's it, I think. Question from Neil Smith.
Mark, you talked a lot about commuting, and NatWest, obviously a big organisation as a lot of the banks. Do you ever? I mean, I know you've been working from home, and probably a lot of your colleagues have. Do you ever see a time when you'll go back to offices, or just continue to work from home? Because I'm going to factories now, and it's quite strange actually, because there's nobody on reception, and you look in the offices and they're completely empty. So the factory's still running as normal. All the office staff are now working from home, and why not? I guess
we're a big organisation. We've not been given a steer yet, Neil. I think what we've been told is when we do return, it will be slightly different. I think it will depend on your role, but I do get a sense of, who knows? Different companies will take a different view, but I guess we have a great opportunity as people do return to address this question around how are you commuting. You know, single occupancy car journeys, we can't, you know, public transport, people don't want to jump on public transport at the moment. Mobility Ways is a really interesting case study. They were, and their only business before COVID was lift share. So they ran lift share and have done for 20 years. COVID hit, they soon quickly realized that people aren't going to lift share in a global pandemic. So they switched their focus to the Mobility Ways, and they've built that business in about 15 months. That they kind of jumped the market and are ahead of everybody else. Businesses will return, and we have an opportunity for thinking differently about our commute, and thinking about, can we reduce our emissions in some way. We will, as a large employer, NatWest employs 50,000 people in the UK. You know, we will return to offices, but it won't be in the same format and the same way we used to. So Jeremy's on the call. Jeremy might spend a couple of days in the office, but 3 days either working at home, or he'll actually probably be out and about seeing people like yourselves on the call, and going and visiting customers. So
yeah, I think it goes a bit further than that as well, Mark. I think you know, from a well-being perspective as well. You know, having staff commuting into offices 5 days a week, sat in traffic, etc., etc. You know, the ability to have, you know, hybrid working where you could be working from home a couple of days a week, that flexibility, work-life balance, It's got to be good from a well-being perspective as well, particularly with all the challenges around mental health. So, yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you, everybody. That's I think there you go again. That's that change of habits, isn't it? That change of procedures to meet with the times. And I'm sure that in the months to come, you'll notice that there's that combination of factors with things like Chamber of Commerce events as well, and people who might be in the Chamber office. Matthias, I'm going to come to you for the last question, sir.
Just a controversial comment. We're all looking forward to give more balance and more weight into manufacturing. Bottom line, manufacturing can't be done from home. And I think whatever we consider, we've got a lot of jobs which can be done in the office. But in the future, if we have to consider motivating people to go into manufacturing versus no black and white, we've got an office job you can do from home. It will take a lot of convincing for people to go down the manufacturing route rather than what we say, oh, it's so nice and easy now to work from a home office. Sorry, I just need to throw that in.
No, it's a very valuable point, Matthias, because obviously that challenge for the skills in every sector is a very live one. And I think you've struck on how making various industries attractive to our future workforce is as an absolutely vital thing that we've all got to do. So controversial not, I think absolutely spot on. So thank you very much for that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I know that we've probably all got Zooms to go to in about 5 minutes time. So I would like to take this opportunity. Hayley, I'm going to thank you first because you got us all together this afternoon. So thank you to you and to the Chamber Events team. Obviously, to our speakers this afternoon, to Alan and to Mark, a big thank you for your contributions. I think we've all found it fascinating and thought-provoking. And what I would say to everybody on the call is if there are certain things you would like to hear discussed at these particular forums, if there's anything you'd like added to these forums, then we need to know. And that way we will change habits and we will change the way we go about things to meet with your requests. So Mark, Alan, Hayley, and everybody, thank you very much for attending this afternoon. We look forward to seeing you soon. Don't forget 6th of July. And then Hayley also put a little mention in there about the 27th of May for our next Sustainability Forum. And look out, because in November with COP26, we're doing a whole month of activities with the Chamber around that as well. So we'll keep you posted and have a good afternoon. Thank you for coming.
Excellent.
Thank you. Cheers.